Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started since you all managed to be on time. And as people join, we will let them jump in. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to a new way that we at the Cyber Risk Collaborative um, are now doing our virtual briefings, our technology and our task force virtual briefings. Um, we are going to be doing these in this format going forward. For those of you who have been with us for a while, you may traditionally have seen us doing this through through the webinar platform that we have at CRA, and instead we've decided to try doing it this in this route. We hope that you enjoy it. We look forward to your feedback on the format, and really looking forward to having this conversation today. So we'll jump in, and please feel free to include any questions, comments, chats, anything you want in the chat, and we will do our best to get to the questions throughout. If you feel like you want to turn on your camera, you're more than welcome to. Not obligated, but we would love to be able to see everybody's faces. And we'll jump in. So thank you all for being here today. Today we're going to be talking about the results from our recent board reporting task force, and we're calling this really the board reporting unlocked, turning data into decisions. And this is going to be the release of some new tools, some new resources as part of our resource toolkit on board reporting. And again, really excited to share with you all the results of that today. So I'm going to start off by welcoming my guest panelists for this. Nick Bruno, who's the CISO of SHL, and Doug Michelson, who's CISO at STC Health. Nick, would you like to say a little hello and introduction?
Hey, everyone. I mean, you already did the introduction there, so there's not much more for me to say.
Doug, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. I'm Doug Michelson. Pleasure to see you.
Awesome. Well, so for those of you who may be joining us and may not be familiar, obviously the Cyber Risk Collaborative, we are a community membership community for current and future cyber leaders. It's about accelerating your career. It's about saving time and money, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. It's about helping to validate strategies and decisions with your peers. Again, something we'll be talking about a lot today, and of course, building your personal brand. Our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about the background behind this task force that we just wrapped up recently. We'll talk about some of the resources that are coming out of this task force that are available to our premium members as of today, as of right now, and also the resources that will be available to all of you who are part of the general membership as well. We'll be talking about a lot about the task force and the findings and the things that came out of that task force experience. And then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and finally talk about some of the upcoming task forces. And if there's any Q&A, anybody wants to talk about, ask any questions, feel free to either submit them throughout the conversation in the chat or submit. We'll have some time at the end for them as well. So to give you a background on task forces are anywhere from 6 to 8 week working groups of CISOs and senior leaders. They are NDA vendor free, which allows for some really open conversation and some really the ability to really have some very, very candid conversations. We have a diverse sector and set of perspectives in task forces. The members the members have actually been responsible for selecting the topics, the themes, the areas of focus. This will be something that you'll see for those of you who have access to our Slack. We actually just recently posted a poll for asking about the next topics. We'll also be sending that out in the member update for those who may not have access to Slack so that you can contribute as well. All of the goal of every task force is not only to come together to talk about these topics and to work as a peer group to address these topics, but it's to come up with uh, templates, policies, resources, things that the members that the members of the larger community can use. And all of these resources are available to CRC Plus members. For those of you who have access to our members portal, you will see that these resources are available right now for you to start using with your teams. Here's a little bit of just an example of some of the organizations that were involved in this recent task force. I want to thank them personally for their involvement. This is a 1 hour every week sitting and talking about this topic, working through some of the challenges and things that are of particular interest and importance. And I'm really appreciative to everybody who showed up week after week. If you haven't heard, one of the big things we did this year was release resource toolkits. It's 19 topic specific toolkits of guidance documents, resource guides, tools, and templates. And we're going to talk about several of them today. What you'll notice, for those of you who have been in our portal, you'll notice that the CISO leadership toolkit has now been rebranded as of today as the board reporting toolkit. And we've added a number of resources, which is the result of what we're going to talk about today. So with that, I wanted to just pause for a moment, and Doug and Nick, I wanted you to be able to share a little bit about your experience being involved in this task force. What made you want to be involved in the task force? Why this topic? And what do you feel like you got most out of it? So, Doug, we'll start with you.
Yikes. Frankly, the part that I love about the task forces, the part that I love about CRA is the community, which please don't hear me like saying this to butter up Dustin, right? But the feeling like I'm not alone. Does that make sense, right? And so hearing from Nick and hearing from other folks, here's your challenge, here's my challenge, and bringing that together and to help produce this so other people feel like we're standing together, though we're in offices thousands of miles away. Yeah.
And Nick, from your perspective, being involved in this task force, I know you were one to very early on jump on this topic, and would love to kind of hear your experience and your takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, just building on what Doug said, I mean, a lot of it comes down from different experiences, different ways of doing it, do's, don'ts, likes, dislikes, different types of feedback. I think that's really where one of the reasons why I jumped onto it is to get this perspective, because it does vary depending on what industry you're in, small, medium-sized businesses. I mean, what levels of board interaction you have with the executive. There's a lot of different things that each person brought to the table. So that was one of the reasons why I jumped onto it. And then the takeaways from it, I mean, take a look at the toolkits and some of the things that were put together for this. It really is just a starting point. I think beyond this, taking this and kind of building on top of it is where the next value comes in, and then also getting the feedback from whoever's using it so we can continuously improve on it. So, I mean, that's kind of the first interaction and kind of the experience I had with this one. But also, I think take a look at any of the next ones that are coming up, kind of how a person should kind of go into that and try to provide what they have for information, but also what they want to take away from it, and then how do you build on top of that. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. And thank you both again for being here. And for those of you who are on here, I see a couple people who were part of the task force as well. Thank you all again for your involvement in this. And I'm really excited to actually share what we're calling the newly released, newly updated board reporting toolkit. And really what it involves, for those of you who are part of our general membership, we have two guidance documents. One that is titled a CISO's quick guide to the boardroom, gives a lot of really good guidance on just the basics of what it means to be in the boardroom, what it means to have to present in the boardroom. And then Another document that we were able to update and refresh at the very end of last year, the CISO developed guide to board cybersecurity briefing, which is again another guidance document. For those of you who are part of our premium cybersecurity plus cyber risk collaborative plus membership, we've got a plethora of documents. Many of them are the result of this task force. The first thing that we've got, and we'll talk through a lot of these, is a standardized visualization guide. So, Doug and Nick, I know one of the things we talked about very early on in the task force was the importance of how you present metrics to the board. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your experience from the task force and kind of some of the things that we talked about in terms of the importance of normalizing, checking the integrity, figuring out the way in which you're going to present metrics to the board? Nick?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things that a lot of us talked about with the metrics in general is making sure that, as you mentioned, the how you got to them can be explained, the integrity aspect of that, and that it's consistent each time you're there. I think the other thing that we brought up around this was more around, great, it's a metric, it's going up, down, whatever it is, but what does that mean? How does a person actually interpret that, and what actions can be taken from that, or what's the expected response to that versus it's just data on the PowerPoint and whatnot. So I think outside of what you mentioned, it's also what's the takeaway, and how is a person supposed to be able to determine, is that good or bad? I mean, so those are some of the things that I think when we started going through some of that, that's what we were kind of talking about and whatnot. So.
And Doug, from your perspective, how important is it to figure out the proper, not just that you've got a metric and you know which metric you need to present, but how you present it to the board, the actual visual that you use?
The mechanic of how, as you're suggesting, I think is maybe the most critical part, and being able to create the analogy and create the common language around it, right? And just demonstrate not only your mastery of it, right, by being able to give that to folks who may not, and for our board, right, aren't in health. We have a very diverse background of our board members. And so as we're presenting to them, being able to produce that language, be able to produce that common ability to speak to something is in my view, right, what we've been most successful with.
Absolutely. So, we spent quite a bit of time talking about metrics, the way you present it, the way you structure it. That's what led to the two supplemental resources. One was really around just what are the different types of visualizations you can use. Another one was about, okay, how do you structure and represent security data? Another thing we'll talk about here in a little bit was also around the anticipating the frequently asked questions that come from the board. And then finally, the other things that we also present, or that we also created, one was around post-meeting action items, tracking, and an overall board reporting checklist to help everybody, to help make sure you don't forget a step or don't forget things. And we'll talk about each of these kind of in depth as we go through. And there was a question that came in from Daniel Nelson. The CRC resources, so the two guidance documents that you see on the left, we will be making available via the weekly member update, and can also be obtained by reaching out to Tom Ward, who will share his email address if you don't already have it. The items that are listed on the right side under the Cyber Risk Collaborative Plus, those are available right now in the CRC Plus members portal. They can easily be found under the board reporting resource toolkit. If you have any trouble finding them, please reach out to myself or Purvik Shah. We'll be happy to work to help you find those items. So stepping back for a moment, one of the first things that we do in a task force is we have the scoping call where we really start to identify some of the challenges that are out there, and we identified really kind of five main challenges. One being, how do you translate the technical metrics into board relevant language? How do you ensure data integrity? We spent quite a bit of time talking about the importance of data integrity, data normalization. We also talked a lot about the moving targets of cybersecurity metrics. How do you show progress when the goalpost is kind of always moving? Um, we talked a little bit about presenting metrics and identified a challenge of presenting metrics in a way that shows a material impact that actually matters to the company, because it may be a metric that to us really matters, but to the company as a whole doesn't really mean anything. And then finally, the ever evolving challenge of industry trends, best practices, the CNN effect, where something happens and all of a sudden, anyone who's probably got a board meeting this week is probably being asked some variation of a question of how are we conducting our communications and are we doing them securely. But Doug, Nick, what what were for you kind of the salient challenges that you felt that were really important for the task force to address, and were the reason that you wanted to be involved? Doug?
For me, it was seeing how others normalize and produce data, right? And how others, how Nick, how our peers are doing it, right? My way is one goober's opinion, and so finding a way to get more data from my peers, right, is that was the key. That for me.
And Nick, from your perspective, what were the challenges that you were most trying to kind of address?
Yeah, and kind of building off what Doug was mentioning, I mean, it's how do you know if it's material impact or not? What are we actually showing that against? Is it against how whatever the item is that you're speaking to, the risk itself is affecting customers, business, internal employees, financial reporting. So like, what's the materiality of that risk? And is it something that you'd be concerned about or not? I think really trying to determine, like, as you kind of go to the first point, how do you actually turn that into the language that the board can actually relate to without getting too deep into the weeds and confusing them. So really having those the experience with that, showing or being able to see how others are attacking that, and really just getting that different perspective on the presentation, and even bringing it into how it's visualized on a slide was one of those things that kind of I think we all talked about from a challenging perspective, is how do you actually get that message across?
Absolutely. So, one of the things I know we talked about very early on was the importance of storytelling. That part of presenting to the board is about telling a story, telling the story of security. And we kind of came up with the idea that really takes a bit of a formulaic approach to some extent. I heard Doug, you mentioned talking about using relatable or current examples. We talked a lot about keeping the reports concise, staying at the right level, using visuals, aligning the security data with business objectives, providing clear, actionable recommendations to drive decision making, and really taking the approach that we show on the right, the executive summary, talking about risk-based metrics, incident overview. How how do you go about, and from the discussion that we had in the task force, Nick, how do you go about and kind of turning the day to day of security into the story that's going to land with the board?
So if I'm trying to articulate what our top risks are, and what it is applicable to, and breaking it down into what I just mentioned, does it apply to customers, business overall, employees, or um, data, whatever it might be, but basically trying to break that down and talk through how the risk is actually applicable to each, and is that an area of maybe not control, or is something in control, but is it something that we feel is acceptable, and being able to kind of talk through the the logic behind that, and if it's something of concern, and if it is of concern, what are we doing to bring it into an acceptable level? So kind of walking through those areas per risk, and then at the end of that, what the actual actions or outcomes or takeaways should be for who actually is receiving that story, and kind of going through that pretty quickly. So
And Doug, from your perspective, obviously being in the industry that you're in, um, there's always a story. There's always somebody who's having some situation. Healthcare is a very highly attacked industry. How do you go about telling the story and using some of those relatable and current examples to help drive your message?
Nick said it incredibly well, and the we have OKRs. Every organization is managed in a different, big picture way, right? And so for me, I take that story, I drive it against whether it's a key objective, or a key result, right, or a broad objective, right, and always loop that back to what we are doing, typically this quarter, right, and then taking the best analogy I can find, and I workshop it with the staff, and it makes them nuts, right? To find the right analogy, the right language to massage to get everybody on board for understanding. And then in the back of that board packet, right, providing all that backup. So if someone wants to, deep dive an analogy, because analogies break down, here's the data.
Right. And I'll say, there this kind of concept of storytelling, we go into quite a bit of depth in the supplemental resource that's mentioned, the structuring and presenting your security data, because we spent a lot of time. You guys spent a lot of time in the task force really talking about not just not just what are the metrics, and we'll talk about some of the other things that are out there to help with, okay, how do I determine the metrics, but once I have the metrics, how do I present it? Because I know in my experience helping to build board decks and being in charge of kind of the security metrics, uh you know inventory at the last company I was at, there were a lot of things that we measured that I knew were important, that we knew were important for the security team, that never made it to the board, or that were presented to the board in a specific way, because again, they care about what the board cares about versus what the security team cares about, is very different. Obviously, at the end of the day, the board is worried about the stock price. They're worried about their investments. They're not worried about how many systems have a security agent on it. If it's more than zero, their concern is going to be, okay, how much is it going to cost me if something happens? So kind of going into that, we talked about the concept that metrics matter. And we talked about three categories of metrics early on: performance, posture, and quality. Nick, can you share for those who may not fully understand, or even as a refresher, what the difference between a performance, a posture, and a quality metric are?
of course you're going to quiz me on this one. Um, and it's always going to escape me at this point without it having
So
in front of my face. So how about we go with
So I know in the task force, we really talked about the concept that a performance metric is about, how many of something did you do? It's more of a like just a metric that you've got, um, to show that something is working. Posture, really, we talked about a lot of it being around, you know, um, how are we enhancing the program? So, performance metric might be, we blocked 500 emails this week, whereas a
yeah,
posture metric is, we had 50% of our employees have been reporting.
and
um
the quality is going to be on the defects and
right,
whatnot. Yeah. So
right.
um,
And my question for you is, taking those metrics into account, how do you, one of the things we talked about was the importance that a metric align with be put into the proper context. So, what are the ways that the task force discussed about aligning metrics, and specifically around things like business risk and compliance frameworks and what have you? How do you, what's the mechanics of that a little bit?
Yeah, so take the quality one for a second. I mean, if you do development, most SaaSes will develop their own software and whatnot. So you'll start to capture metrics around your static code, dynamic software composition, vulnerabilities around that, how many secrets are in your code, all things associated with that. And you start to determine one, what your baseline is, and then also are you actually improving, getting worse, so on and so on. So being able to kind of translate that into, and again, from a business perspective, these things, if exploited or if kind of put together and leveraged, could actually lead to security incidents and data breaches and things that could actually impact the business monetarily, because there's some implications there from a regulatory standpoint, a customer reputation, so on and so on and so on. So being able to kind of map that all together and kind of determine, are we getting better, worse based on the quality of our code? And then also, if anything was actually realized from a security incident or whatnot that actually leaked customer data, what that story is that kind of led to that, and being able to show kind of the I guess the statements around that and determine what's going to be done in order to um, avoid that or make sure that we're keeping track of what's going on and are we getting better, worse, so on and so on and so on. So, I mean, just taking a look at a metric around secure development and you're breaking that down into different elements or not, and then ultimately, does this something that leads to a business impact that would actually have financial implications on it? That's something that could be of interest to various members of the board. Um, so that's one,
And
just one example there.
Doug, one of the things that we really focused on that was focused on in the task force that I think is really important, and I want to get your perspective on and hear your thoughts on, was this idea that as we've become more reliant as organizations on third party vendors, many of our metrics rely on third party vendors. So how does that relationship, that balance, how do present a metric as your own, let's say, when you're reliant on a third party?
Wow. The we take Nick's examples, right, and add that financial impact. And so as we are evaluating kind of the way that your question phrased or processed in my head, right, is third-party vendor management. Does us going out and getting this vendor, right, if that vendor gets compromised because they don't have the sheer totality of controls that a health organization may have versus, just someone who's taking a credit card, right? What's our exposure? What's our risk? How do we come up with the language around that? And for us, right, and for many other boards, right, it's a financial impact discussion, right? And so we try to, do we want this vendor? The team says yes. They pass basic muster, right? Is there substantive data that's going to be in there? No, we don't care, right? Broadly, right? If we start getting
Right.
to patient data, PII, PHI, you better watch that list of questions grow to the hundreds, and the team jumping into every single one as they put together that financial impact model to say whether or not we should engage with this vendor.
Right.
So common language.
So one of the other things that we talked about, and we've talked about a little bit, is the whole concept of speaking the language of the board, and this was something that came up quite a bit. Um, what from your involvement and discussion in the task force, what were some of the kind of key takeaways, key things that stood out to you or that you took away from the conversation about the way in which you should address and the things that are gonna resonate best with the board in the approach that you used, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things, and depending on how you kind of grew up from a security perspective, a lot came up through the technical kind of realm and whatnot. So I mean, one thing when speaking to the board is get out of that. Don't be yourself with that. Don't start talking about the different nuances around the technology or things that really no one's going to understand within a matter of 30-second statement. So, I mean, one of the things when you go into the board and trying to get a message across is to really, and it's not to dumb it down, but to make it as simple as possible so it can be understood. And then, yes, if there's follow-up questions, you'll get that, but don't go into the technical jargon or try to use abbreviations or go through the protocols or do any of the stuff that most of us like to do. Really keep it simple and try to get the message across as quickly as possible so that they understand the main points.
And then, Doug, from your perspective, what were kind of the key takeaways you had from the task force discussions around, you know, the things, the mechanics of actually presenting to the board?
Back to that common language, right, which is finance. Back to that, don't we all love having a propeller on our head? This is not that moment. We don't need to talk about various, Diffie-Hellman and cipher moments. We don't need to talk about hashing in front of the board. What we need to talk about is how we're managing encryption, right, with TLS at a very high level. We need to talk about our doing this leads us to not having this financial risk. And so it was really understanding how others take that language and adding that to my lexicon, adding their phrases to the back of my head, and taking a lot of their examples and trying to find ways to make that my own. We're in
Absolutely.
health, as you would expect, right? And so we had folks who are car guys. So finding language of how to bring that to a car, right? Again,
Right.
that analogies will break down. You'll find your way.
Right. So we then, throughout the task force, what we ended up doing was really breaking down the process of presenting to the board, starting with the preparation, the pre-board stuff, then the actual board meeting, and then the after. Um, talk about talk a little bit about the importance, Doug, first, and then Nick, the importance of and the process of preparing to walk into the boardroom. What's going on? How early are you starting? What was kind of the discussion around the preparatory aspects of board reporting?
Always be prepared. Never go in flat. Uh, uh, Always read what's in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Understand what's in the New York in those two publications for the last 2 weeks. As you're getting that in your head, what were the requests from last time? What were the follow-up items that you need to follow up with? Did you complete those? Do they need to go to the board broadly or to the subcommittee? Right? Make follow up, follow up, follow up. We all have a very long to-do list. Theirs comes first. And then, making sure that you have those data points to go along with, for me, it's 5 slides. I get 5 and I'm in and out in 15. One guy's experience, right? And so data, data, and data.
And then Nick, from your perspective, talk a little bit about the preparation for the board, and the things that we discussed in the task force that really stood out to you.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Doug mentioned, I mean, talk to your executives, like talk to your CEO, your CFO, and others that are working with the board day in, day out, and understand what are they being asked? What are some of the things that the executive team wants you to go there to answer initially? You can still kind of go into the normal stuff. I have that as part of the backup data, but what is the pressing items that the CEO wants you to cover because it's a discussion that they've had with the different committees and whatnot. I think that's one of the things that, and again, everybody has different experiences, but at least over the last couple, that's one of the biggest things I do first off is really understand what does the CEO, the CFO, what are they being asked and how do I incorporate that into what I'm actually going to do within my 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I know we definitely talked about, and that you guys kind of came up with in the task force was the idea that it's really helpful to have checklists, to have the ability to remember, look at different things, to not um, miss anything. Um, how important or how valuable is it to have, a reminder checklist or something that you can like refer to, even if you've done this 100 times, Nick?
It's good for consistency to make sure you don't miss anything. I mean, you're always going to have the things that need to be added because of the action items from before or the new topics or whatnot. But if you're trying to keep the material, the data, the look, feel, all that stuff consistent each time you go in so that there's not a lot of searching from the board members. There's not a lot of trying to figure out what does this mean. They can take a look at what was there before, compare it to here, and kind of get the main point across. So consistency is one of the biggest reasons um, that this is very useful, at least from my standpoint. And again, you're always gonna get that curveball, but it's gonna be the that you need to add in. But the consistency is an important part.
And Doug, how helpful was it for you, going through the task force, to have kind of that peer collaboration of determining what are the things that should be on a checklist?
This is the checklist that came out of it to us, right? To the folks who that we use today. Your
Right.
list, right? As you go camping, Dustin, right? As Nick goes camping, right? You're going to bring different things camping than I'm going to bring camping, and so I live in Arizona. Uh, so like that list is going to be different and unique, right? Hopefully, as was said before, this is that green Lego. This is to build upon. This is have this. This should be a great starting point. And so it was a great resource to have to make sure every time we're ready to go.
So I know we spent quite a bit of time as well in the task force. You guys spent quite a bit of time talking about anticipating questions from the board. Um, and on the slide we talk about some of the kind of the key, the highest highlight kind of questions that come up. Um, and one of the things that was developed, that you guys developed, was really this idea of a frequently asked questions guide, the most common types of questions, and kind of a sense of what the answers maybe should be, or how to get to the answers and what have you. um, talk a little bit, Doug, about some of the typical questions that you get, and some of the frequent questions where everybody, or most organizations, regardless of where you are in what industry you're in, you're going to almost always see these types of questions.
Wow. The I find that after we've built the trust, my organization has built the trust, right? Now it's questions about what does this mean? And I find that I spend a lot of time teaching, right? We've got some doctors on our board, as you would expect, right? They know the human body. They don't understand these stupid things. That's just magic to them, right? So we spend a lot of time teaching and trying to help them understand what does this mean materially to them. And so it's a constant battle to know what questions I'm going to get. It's wow, what's in the journal and what's in the Times.
Yeah. Nick, from your perspective, what are some of those kind of questions that you're almost always preparing yourself for because they're going to come up?
So two things. One, absolutely whatever's in the recent news and whoever's going to be talking to their board in the next couple weeks should take a look at what happened yesterday with a very high profiled cloud service provider, because that I've already gotten questions on that one. But I would say one of the things, especially if you have board members that are on multiple boards, doesn't matter what the industry is, but understanding what they're on and if they've had any recent incidents that have been high profiled, and is it something that we could realize? And if the answer is yes, what are we doing to make sure that we do not realize? that exposure and whatnot. So, and you're not going to always know which board members are on which boards and what always the incidents are, but they're going to be privy to some information and they're going to ask a question. Hey, this company had an issue with an exposed S3 bucket. Is that something we should be concerned about?
Yeah, and
And also, don't be afraid to say, I will get back to you. Let me get some data first.
yeah, I mean to definitely to highlight what both of you have said, if your organization is using, a specific a very well-known ERP software, or provider, you may want to pay attention to what's been happening in the news as well.
I was trying
There's
to stay away from actually giving that. Let people search for it.
Oh, Nick's trying to make a scavenger hunt for you guys. I was trying to give you guys a little bit more information, so but you know, so again, one of the things that that was something that you guys definitely talked about was these common questions. Things like what are your top security risks, and give gave a real good. You guys kind of talked a lot about the various ways in which these questions can be answered, not in a here's the form answer, the canned answer to give, but here are the things you should get together and be prepared to answer regarding it. And I think what was really interesting, certainly for me, and I'd love to hear both of your perspectives, but how much was there a sense that you felt a commonality across industries? Doug, you're in health. Nick, you're in software services. Uh, how how much of the experience of being in a task force gave you a sense of a reassurance that you're not alone and that it's not unique to your industry?
I think Doug's opened this up. We're not alone, and and I think it's taken that it's the task force helped to just give the different perspectives, and we're all trying to get the same message across one way or the other, and how we twist the words and how we do all that is definitely the nuances to it, um but at the end of the day, it's the same message. What's our risk? Do we actually have an understanding of what it is? And not that are we in control, but is it at an acceptable level? And if it's not, what are we doing to get it to an acceptable level? Um, so
And then, Doug, from your perspective.
Whether it's CRA or other large organizations who are trying to get executives in a room. I said it to a gentleman in the middle of COVID when it felt especially alone in a health organization, right? We are not alone. We are all solving the same challenge slightly differently. We're all parsing 853 slightly differently, right? To meet our challenges, our budgets, what we have available to us. And Nick said it well, right? Are we exposed to something? How are we dealing with it? Succinctly get in and get out.
Absolutely. So before we move to questions, and if anyone's got questions and they want to submit them in the chat, you're more than welcome. We'll also give opportunity if anyone wants to come off mute. But what were some of the kind of key takeaways? I've got up on the screen certainly the key takeaways that we had recorded from the task force, but for each of you, kind of what were the key takeaways when it comes to board reporting that each of you took away from the task force? Doug.
Language is the key, right? The common language that your board speaks, right? Everyone has various levels of education, various levels of knowledge of the ins and outs, right? It's language and consistency.
And then Nick, from your perspective, what were some of the key takeaways you had?
yeah, I think the one of the main ones, and it's always the challenging one, but it's the metrics, and there's a lot of metrics that we could talk to, but which ones actually have a material impact that they should be concerned about? And is it something that is at that level of being acceptable? And if not, how are we getting it to that acceptable level? Um, and I think the list of metrics, and there's various things in CRA that talk about the metrics and what you can include and not include, how you measure out, but really get down to what's their takeaway for that metric? Is it something that you can explain very quickly? And then really, um, if you're in their seat, is that something you want to know about?
Absolutely. So, and Nick mentioned it, we have a whole resource toolkit around security metrics. It has a resource, it has a workbook in it that has been developed over the last couple of years by numerous teams to help you build those metrics, help you document those, help put them into a visual format. And then, of course, again, as of today, the board reporting toolkit, which includes not only the guidance documents, the supplemental resources, but some tools and templates to actually help you, including some examples of board presentations, some ways to present the actual information, a board reporting checklist, uh, and a template for the handout that can accompany your board slides, and also as Nick mentioned, it's important to keep track of the things that come after out of a meeting and that you have to follow up on. One of the things that the task force was able to create was an after meeting action tracking uh, document. A very very good document that will allow you to keep track of those things that you took out of the meeting that need to be addressed before the next one. So um, highly encourage everybody to check that out. Again, available in the member portal. Many of the other documents, the guidance documents and others, will be made available in upcoming member updates as well. And you can also always reach out to Tom Ward or myself or Pervik, and we'll be happy to work with you. Um, Before I open up for any questions, please uh, 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 um, know that we've got some upcoming task forces. We're currently have our cyber insurance task force, which is going to be wrapping up this week, and then we've just started, and anyone is more than welcome to still join. We're about to have our kind of kickoff meeting for this, which is the security team development task force. That'll be starting this coming Tuesday. If you're an accelerator program member and you're interested in being involved in that task force, please contact myself or Perfect Shaw to sign up for that. You can also check it out in the member portal. The calendar invite is right in there. You can just get the calendar invite, download it, accept it, and move from there. We'll also be sharing in the member update that will come out either later today or tomorrow a link to the survey in Slack to suggest topics for future task forces. We're currently planning out the next quarter's worth of task forces, and highly encourage everybody to get involved in those. I'm going to pause here if there are any questions. If anyone wants to come off mute and ask any questions as well, would love to open it up to questions here. So, Doug and Nick, what for those who maybe have presented, both those who are presenting for perhaps for the first time, that are listening to this, and for those who have presented hundreds of times to the board, what is the advice that you would give to them when it comes to preparing, thinking about their approach, areas that they could maybe be thinking about to find ways to improve or enhance the way in which they present to the board?
Ooh.
I mean, one thing that I do, and I constantly do it, is whatever I'm putting together, I am sitting down with my CEO and CFO and reviewing all of it prior to getting in front of the board. And I think also when you take a look at, and it's just to get, again, it's a sanity check. Is the message clean? Are we talking about the right stuff? Am I forgetting anything? Is there anything new that they have received from the board members since the last time I was in front? And I think the other thing, and this kind of goes back to action items, and it's actually an important thing to keep in mind for action items. Some action items can wait until the next time you're there. Some cannot. So there might be immediate follow-up that is required to understand the difference when you take an action item and if it's something you have to get back to them and how quickly, or can it wait until the next time you're in front of them?
Doug, anything to add from your perspective?
Consistent, right? Calm. We do not be afraid to say I do not know. Don't speak too quickly, right? We're here, they're human. You're human. You got this.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you again to the task force. Thank you all for joining us today. As you exit, as you leave the meeting today, there'll be a short survey. We really would appreciate your feedback on the this event and this gathering and the content we discussed and anyone who's interested in learning more about the various elements of the membership, there's an opportunity to notate there. We've got a number of really great events coming up over the next couple weeks. Anyone who's interested, we'll be sending out into the member update. But if you want to learn more about the resource toolkits, I'm going to be hosting a demo of the resource toolkits. It's a more deep dive of the resource toolkits. That'll be this coming Monday. We again, if you're interested, please either check the weekly member update or reach out to Perfect Shah or myself. We'll make sure to get you added to that event. We've got other events that are going to be coming up, both live events as well as digital. Our next major digital event will be April 16th. We're going to be having we're going to be really focusing on leadership persona, executive presence, how to take your skills and your knowledge and your expertise and create and develop your personal brand, and then how to leverage your personal brand in the ways that you want to leverage it. We're going to have a couple of really great speakers on that. Billy Spears will be joining us, as well as Chris Rides. And we're really excited for that one. Please check the member update for that one as well, or reach out to Pervic or myself, and we'll make sure to get you the registration link. Thank you again all for being here today. And we look forward to seeing everybody again. We'll be doing this exact same meetup again next month. We'll be talking about cyber insurance on that one. So thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the upcoming weekend. Anyone who is a baseball fan, happy opening day of baseball. And we will see everybody again very soon. Thank you.